Hello, Made to Thrive Nation. I've got some special guests. I'm actually quite emotional because this app, Panda, has really blown me away. I've been spending a lot of time, and I've got even notes on my whiteboard behind there, but I've got two of the founders here, Allan and Alon. It's been an absolute privilege to go through their work. This is going to change a lot of people's lives. And welcome to the Made to Thrive show, guys.
Thank you, Steve. Nice to be here.
Brilliant.
Oh, we get
a fist pump, but you've got to hold that thing a little bit closer.
Okay.
But yeah, it's just exciting because there's a lot of despair. And let me start with you, Allan, and we'll get a bit of back history in terms of your own sort of training in that. But I do want to sort of give the audience and the viewers on YouTube something to grab hold of, you know, a story, a testimonial of people's lives that have been changed with the work that you're doing with Panda now.
Sure. Well, I am a clinical psychologist.
Yes.
I worked for 14 years in private practice, and then I started the group of Akeso psychiatric hospitals. We started off with one hospital, and we sold it to Netcare in 2018. And at that point, we were treating about 800 people a day and about 21,000 people a year.
Wow.
And those were very clinical disorders: depression, anxiety, bipolar disorder, eating disorders, etc., addiction. When I left there, I realized there was a huge gap with mental health care, specifically with primary mental health care, because people just do not know how to enter the system. And someone asked me the other day, why is it so expensive? And I said, well, you can say the same thing about having a child. If every time the child gets a snotty nose, you take it to a pediatrician, you're going to think that taking care of a child is very expensive too. But if you learn how to access the system in a particular kind of way, where you start off at the lowest intervention and then move up as your symptoms increase or as as your need increases, the system can become much more efficient, but it isn't like that at the moment. And we set out, Alon and I, with Panda, to really make the mental health system that much more accessible, and then also to provide or to enable the provision of care through the app. So people can enter the app in a very accessible way, and then also they can find the care that they need inside of the app.
Brilliant. So that's Panda, and I know that's a vision. You give me this sort of the high view, but someone's listening now. Why should they even care about what you're saying? Give us a story that they can really grab hold of straight away with regards to anxiety, depression, burnout. These things are very common now, and we've realized what's happened in the pandemic, and even before the pandemic, people are not coping with regards to their mental performance.
Absolutely. I mean, one particular helpline was getting about 3,000 calls a month on average before the pandemic. And then during the pandemic, that went up to almost 30,000 calls a month. So you can imagine that. The suicide rate, specifically among men, increased dramatically. I think we have the 10th highest suicide rate in the world at the moment in South Africa. The thing is about Panda is that we have this really amazing feature called the forest. And the forest is a community area where people can access the app in an anonymous way, in an audio-only way, and they can even type. And the amazing thing about the forest is that it provides everybody with very easy access to community and to primary care help. And what you find happening in the forest is that there's a concept in psychology called catharsis. Catharsis is really about telling your story, and just in telling your story for the first time, you're going to feel better, just through telling the story. Never mind an intervention or anything else, just in actually going somewhere and telling a story to people that care about it can have an effect. And what Alon and I have seen through some of the feedback is that people in the forest have told their stories for the first time ever.
Wow.
And some of them, Alon told me the story the other day, and maybe he can just correct me. There was someone who had been holding on to something, I think, for over 30 years, and spoke about it for the first time ever in the forest, and wrote to us and said what an incredible experience it was, just telling their story.
Well, let's drill down on storytelling. It's an ancient sort of ancestral practice. How important that is for the psyche, for the emotional health. I mean, it's just such part of African history, sitting around the fire in a circle. Nelson Mandela used to say one of the things he learned from his own father was he used to sit the leaders in a circle. He'd be the last to speak, and people would tell their stories.
Yeah.
So tell us about the therapeutic benefit of telling stories.
Well, there's two parts to that. The one is about telling the story, and the other one is about the listener. And one of the things that we really kind of encourage in the app is active listening, which is a strange concept because obviously we're listening all the time. We can actually never turn our ears off, right? But there's a difference between listening and letting things sort of just kind of wash over you and actively listening to someone. And I think what we're trying to give people is the experience of actively listening by providing them with communities that care. And then as you go deeper into the app and you access different kinds of care, finding people who are interested and curious about your story. And I think so social media generally is not really curious about you. And if they are, they're curious in a very superficial kind of way. We're actually trying to change that. We're trying to make that social media experience, very meaningful through people telling stories, but also people on the other side being interested in those stories.
Brilliant. Let's go to Alon. Just introduce yourself, maybe it's sort of a backstory, how you got involved with the Panda app and what the vision is. I know Allan shared a little bit of that, but I think it's really important that people sort of get a stratosphere view of why the Panda app and what you guys are trying to achieve.
Okay. Yeah, awesome. Great to be here. I think come from a very different background to Allan. Started a career off in banking, spent a couple of years there, did an MBA, and didn't want to be a career banker. I came back to SA, this was back in 2013, and was looking to get involved in the startup world. And I was fortunate to get the opportunity to join Uber as general manager for Uber in Johannesburg. I was actually their first employee in Africa. So back in the day when Uber was still relatively small, about 200 employees globally, and was fortunate to grow with the business. I was there for 7 years. When I left, over 25,000 employees. We were in 7 different countries across the continent, millions of riders and over 100,000 driver partners using the app. So really loved my time at Uber, but after 7 years, it was time to leave. And took a bit of time out and was figuring out what it was that I wanted to do. And I had idealistically in my mind, I wanted to do something in either education or healthcare. And the reason for that was I saw the benefits that technology could bring to the transport sector. Uber didn't create moving from point A to B. They just brought technology to a traditional industry and made it more efficient. And I think the power bigger for a lot of people and really changed the way that people could earn and people could move around the city. And I thought there's a lot of exciting things going on in health tech or ed tech, and I'd love to be part of that. And at that point, I was introduced to Allan. As he mentioned, he left Netcare shortly after he had worked there for a while post selling the business. And he was looking to do something technology enabled in the space. And I'm obviously not a mental health professional, but I've been surrounded by mental health professionals. My mom's a social worker, my wife's a clinical psychologist, her mom's a social worker, her dad's a clinical psychologist. So a lot of professionals in my life, and I've seen the amazing impact that they've made. And I think to the point that you hit on, I think thankfully the world is becoming more aware of mental health. It's been exacerbated by COVID. I think the need for support because COVID was so difficult for a variety of reasons. And there was just this amazing opportunity to do something with Allan, who's an entrepreneur and a subject matter expert, and hopefully make an impact in this crisis that we're facing. I think the World Health Organization estimate that by 2030, depression will be the leading cause of disability globally.
Sure.
So it's a real thing. It has real business impact. It has real world impact. It affects, it doesn't discriminate. It really is impacting everyone. Maybe not everyone has a word for it or talks about it, but it's there. And we were introduced, and initially we looked at this and it was a little bit overwhelming because it's a very, very competitive space globally, even in SA, but especially globally. I think there are over 20,000 mental health and wellness apps out there. So initially when we looked at the space and did our initial competitive kind of review, we thought, are we really going to do something that someone else is not? But ultimately took a view listen, we'll back the team, big problem, different people will benefit in different ways, let's give it a shot. And I think the more time we spent together, the clearer the idea became. And we started working on this about 18 months ago, went live with the app about a year ago, and it's been awesome to see some of the impact that we've had. To your story point, Al hit on that one where the person felt heard. I think that's feedback that we get a lot of the time. I think a lot of people are lucky, right? They got people in their lives that they can speak to, but not everyone has that. A lot of people either suffer in silence, right? And that's driven by a fear of being judged or not having people that they can open up to. They don't have a community around them. So we're trying to create access to that community. And we're seeing that community blossom in the app, where there are a lot of people who, even though they sign up anonymously, know each other and know each other's stories and support each other and provide positive affirmation, which they're just not getting elsewhere. And that's really the intention. Another anecdote, but an important one, is we had someone who signed up anonymously, and then one day they just decided to change. They're ready to put their real name out there. And they weren't ready up front, and they weren't ready to enter the system with their real name, but through that process of catharsis, through that process of sharing their story, through the positive affirmations that they were getting in the forest, through these live sessions that we offer, they were ready to do that and put themselves out there. So I thought that was quite powerful.
Brilliant. And maybe, Allan, you can answer this with regards to the mental, health, state, or, sort of what's happening in South Africa specifically in Africa, in terms of anxiety, in terms of depression, in terms of burnout. What is actually happening in our land?
Well, if we just look at epidemiology, 1 in 3 people during the course of their lifetime are going to have some kind of clinical mental health issue. When I say clinical, I mean something that needs to be treated, whether it's anxiety or depression or a trauma or a sleep issue or anything that sort of can be classified as something related to mental health. So that's 1 in 3 people, so one of us. And I can say for sure that I've been treated as, for mental health issues throughout my adult life. Of those, it works out to be about 15% of any population in any given year will seek some kind of mental health care. So some of those people obviously are chronic, and that's why the stat is not so much higher in terms of lifetime prevalence. So in a population like South Africa, and let's say we've got 60 million people, 9 million of those people will have some kind of mental health issue this year. And of those, probably between 75 and 80% will get no input whatsoever, because either they just don't know how to access the system, or wherever they live, there isn't an accessible or an efficient way of getting the care that they need. So I think that's the predicament we find ourselves in.
That's hectic, and I think that's why we've got to look at technology, at helping people and reaching more people, which I think is really important. A smartphone, through education, through YouTube, or a platform like Panda can really help people. So take us through the overall picture of Panda, how people can access it, how it is from a different paradigm to sort of traditional ways of either phoning Lifeline or, going to see a counselor or a psychologist. How can people approach it? What are the sort of different categories of Panda?
Cool. So I think our whole premise is we want people to be proactive. I think you've hit on this, in that the problem with traditional methods, they're there for people at the moment of distress. And that's obviously important. People need support at the moment of distress. But in some ways, in the same way that obviously you're investing in your physical health, you're investing in your mental health, people don't know how to invest in mental health. So I was at a symposium around mental health, and someone literally stood up and they said they're not ready to speak to a psychologist, right? They know that they're not perfect, but they don't know what they'll say in a room with a psychologist. So how do people start their mental health journey? How do you start exercising your mental health? And that's really what the crux of the product is. It's a way for people to be proactive with their mental health, right? How can you do that? Maybe just interested in a topic. Maybe that topic is sleep. Maybe it's parenting. I'm interested in parenting. I may not, say that I'm depressed or I'm anxious, but I've got a kid and that comes with anxiety, right? I want to learn how to be a better parent. What a great way to start my mental health journey, or equipping me with tools to be more proactive, to better manage my kid, because if I don't, then that could lead to issues. So what we're really trying to do is give people a way to be proactive in their mental health, because if you're proactive, in the same way with your physical health, you can minimize the likelihood of a serious incident down the line.
Okay,
so that's
so
really...
Number one's proactive. I think people are carrying that. You go to the place, you might not want to see a psychologist, but you want to go and interact into the different areas. I'll tell you, my favorite is the life skills area, on the app. I've spent a lot of time, I love the videos. We'll talk about, I've just got an affinity to that, and we'll talk about Allan and talk about dialectical behavior therapy and a lot of these things that I think are really important, because I think I do want to add value. the app is there, but there are some real important concepts that are being put on the app that I think are really beneficial. So maybe take us through the categories and then how they can dive into the app.
Yeah. So as you've said, the forest is a starting point, right? It's a low risk, low entry point. You sign up anonymously. We believe the big barriers for people accessing mental health are stigma, cost, and not knowing how to enter the system. So it's all about breaking down those barriers. How do we do that? You access the app anonymously. From a cost perspective, our forest sessions at this point, all of our content and all of our assessments are completely free. So that's the cost element. Not knowing how to navigate the system, another big point. And we're actually seeing that as a big barrier to people. If I hurt my shoulder, I go to the hospital, right? I'm seen by a nurse. Depending on severity, I go for an x-ray. Depending on the severity, maybe I go back to the nurse. Maybe I go to a doctor. Maybe I go to an orthopedic surgeon. That does exist in mental health. People don't know how to enter the system, right? So we're trying to give people access to assessments to make it clearer. Okay, this is what you're dealing with. This is our recommendation. Obviously, go speak to your doctor, get other advice, but these are all scientifically validated assessments that have got a lot of research behind them. We're just making them accessible, and that becomes your next entry point, right?
That's subjective assessment.
Subjective.
Not sort of like any clinical lab data or anything like that, or any heart rate variability data or nothing.
So
like
it's just questions at this point that you...
subjective assessment.
Exactly. So you just answer the questions, that gives you feedback. Then depending on the severity of the issue, you'll get personalized recommendations.
Is that via algorithm or person?
Algorithm.
Okay.
So it's all data driven, and these again are all assessments that have been validated. They've got bands which are objective. Depending on the level of severity, there are different interventions that are objectively recommended. A lot of those interventions you can access through the app, like joining regular support groups or going through the content section. We've got a content section which is all at this point based on dialectical behavioral therapy or positive psychology, which Al will talk to in more detail. But the intention behind the content is to equip people with practical life skills that they can implement on a day-to-day basis, right? And they've got applicability in personal life and professional life. Then thereafter, we have text-based chat support, which we see as a low-cost primary care intervention, and it goes to Alan's point in triage. You know, maybe you're not ready to go see a psychologist or a psychiatrist, or maybe your issue is actually not that severe that you don't have to do that. So for less severe non-clinical issues, we can connect you to a registered wellness counselor through the app, and you can have text-based chat support. The benefit of that and the feedback that we're getting on that is that sometimes people just, don't have private space where they can do a call with the professional. It's a lot easier to type your story than tell your story if you're doing it for the first time. And you can get guidance and speak to a professional. If it's within the scope of practice, they'll help you. And, maybe you're going through a rough time, maybe you're going through a breakup, change of jobs, whatever.
These counsellors, Alon, or these psychologists?
They're all counsellors.
Okay. So
counsellors or social workers, yeah.
Or social workers. So they're registered. So there's a patient practitioner relationship there that's set up.
Yeah, 100%. But this is low cost. That's 150 Rand for a 30-minute session. Okay. So hopefully a lot more accessible.
Is that text 150?
Yeah.
Okay. So that's really low cost compared to what's out there.
Exactly. Then we do offer. We know that that's not going to cater to everything. That's not going to cater to all levels of functionality or severity of issue. So we also have a number of mental health professionals listed in the app that you can book one-on-one time with as well. So the intention is we can cater and provide you with assessments and then personalized access to the right care at the right time. Again, for very severe situations, we have an emergency number listed in the app which you can call. And they are trained. It's not us, it's third parties, it's the Akeso helpline, which will then triage the issue, and then they are equipped to either put you in contact with private or public emergency services if there's a need for that. But it really all comes down to helping people find the right care at the right time and catering to people depending on the severity of the issue that they're facing.
Brilliant. Let's dive into some incredible concepts, dialectical behavior therapy. I thought it was incredible. I think of my wife having the sort of the emotional mind and myself having the logical, reasonable mind, trying to find the wise mind. I think these concepts were unbelievable, really, and I think it's through education and awareness, Allan, that we can really help a lot of people before they become that person who's in an emergency state. Preventative care. We think of Mate to Thrive, my company as well, with our consultants and coaches. We want to treat people before they get, or engage them before they get to that very chronic stage and they really do need significant medical intervention. So I think it's incredible, the awareness in that. So tell us about DBT, why it's so important and how people can can sort of connect with it and engage with it, because I think it's simple but profound.
Yeah.
And I just shared it with my kids. I've shared it with people, just because people can hold on to that, and just the whole process of non-judgment. I think that's so important. To see people for who they are and not judge them, whether they've got the emotional or they've got the very reasonable or logical mind.
Yeah. So Panda's trying to do something very new and very different and actually very ambitious. But at the same time, we're really concerned about scope of practice, that everything we offer in the app, people understand what kind of care they're being given. And we're very concerned about evidence-based, using evidence-based medicine or evidence-based interventions. And dialectical behavior therapy, dialectical means both accepting yourself for who you are and realizing that you may need to change. And that's the dialectic. It's the spectrum. Was developed by Dr. Marsha Linehan, and she developed it for a particular group of people who functioned at what we call the borderline state. The borderline state is very quickly the state in between neurosis, which is what we all have when we have anxieties that haven't happened yet or anything like that, and psychosis. So these patients are quite serious patients. And the two main features of borderline functioning people is that they self-harm and they have terrible relationships. So if we look at what dialectical behavior therapy really does, it helps people to understand the different parts of their mind. And then the skills-based part of it is to self-regulate through feedback. In order to have proper feedback within yourself, you need to be mindful. So it teaches one how to be mindful, to be aware of one's sensations, and not to automatically act out. And that's really so much about the self-harm and about the relational aspects. So that's why we really love dialectical behavior therapy. And, I've seen it work in action in the hospitals, and I've seen it really work in action. So many facilities have adopted it because it's evidence-based and because people can relate to it so easily. And it really does work. Positive psychology, what we really decided to do from the very outset was to focus on people's skills and what they do have, as opposed to often what one experiences, especially with mental health, is where you're talking about the problems and what your deficits are, where you're coming short or falling short. And positive psychology really turns that on its head and said, let's focus on the things that you already do have, and let's build those things like resilience, like mindfulness, how to be caring in relationships, kindness, and those kind of concepts.
Allan, let's talk about stress. I had Richard Sutton on the podcast, the stress code. And there's this understanding that stress is negative, and we sort of unpacked with a lot of execs and him what eustress is and distress is, and how important it is that stress is actually beneficial, but it can be harmful. Maybe you can unpack that, because some people can't relate to anxiety, or they can't relate to depression. They just say, I'm stressed. Even my 6-year-old, through COVID, running around saying, where's this little bacteria? I feel stressed about it, And so these concepts that I think we can deconstruct for the listeners.
Sure. So if we think about 24 hours in a day and what, to be philosophical for a moment, what life is really about, I think, or actually Freud started speaking about this. So Freud spoke about the most important things in life are to be able to love and be loved in return, and to be able to work and find meaning in your work. We add a third thing, which is how to play and how to rest. So we think about those three concepts, and often they're broken up into sort of 8-hour sections in the day. If one has, so stress is good overall. It can drive you, it can feed your ambition, it can sort of make you look twice before you cross a road. It can act in your best interests. But when you are overstressed and the amount of energy that you need to expend on just maintaining things is not equal to the amount of energy you're getting from the environment or from your relationships, then what I think starts to happen is that you start to get affected in one of those three key areas. And you'll find that it will affect your relationships, it will affect your ability to work, to concentrate, to actually maintain some kind of work ethic which makes you proud of yourself. And then it will interfere in some way with your ability to play because you can't switch off, or your ability to sleep. And I think that when it starts to interfere in that way, so we think of it very much at Panda as in a way of three aspects. So if we deconstruct depression, anxiety, bipolar, mood disorders, addiction, any of those things, and we say, let's move away from the diagnosis and let's see how it affects you in terms of the kind of risks that you put yourself through, how well you function in your daily life, and how much distress you feel. You can actually measure those things. We can start to deconstruct all of these diagnoses like stress or burnout or anything else and say, how's it really affecting me? And what skills do I need to start putting that right?
Sure, sounds interesting. And then the mind management program that you've got there, I remember was POP, and that acronym is pause, then observe, and then practice mindfulness. Is that something that you're trying to give as a tool with regards to any type of environmental stresses that are coming to you, that are depleting you and not energizing you?
POP is really supposed to kind of give you a pause between a stimulus and your response to it.
Okay.
And, how long does it take to relapse if you're an alcoholic? Well, it takes this long, right? Yeah. But if you look at that beer and it looks so good, but you pause, okay, and you think about, is this something that I actually want to do? So we're teaching people, we're helping people in some way to just put that gap between the stimulus and your response to that stimulus, because often we respond so automatically to stimuli in our lives, and we're trying to get people to be more mindful.
Okay, is
or
that
help
almost
people to get more mindful.
like Viktor Frankl, between stimulus and response is a space, and there lies our growth and there lies our choice, to that stimulus.
Well, exactly. I mean, Viktor Frankl wrote about these really awful experiences in the camps during the Holocaust, and what he really worked through, or tried to work through, was how does he respond to these awful stimuli that were kind of really affecting everybody around him, and in that pause, he found meaning. That he could just pause and he could, really understand that the reaction to the stimuli around us is where, and that being mindful about what it is that we're being confronted with is often where we'll find meaning in our lives.
It seems like there's a lot of sort of the reasonable, logical mind there that sort of has to overcome the emotional response, almost the amygdala response, that sort of initial straight emotional reaction. Are you teaching people outside of that stimulus to develop these skills so that they can respond correctly?
So if we go back to sort of classical psychology, we think about the id, we think about the superego, and then we think about the ego. Okay, so the id wants everything, and it wants everything now. It's like it's a baby, they feel cold, or they feel hungry, or they feel whatever it is, they cry because something in them is very organic and very natural, and it's saying, I'm feeling this feeling and I need to be calmed down, or I need to be soothed in some way. The superego comes in a little bit later, and it says, you have to wait. You can't get everything your own way. And there's sort of this battle. We can think of it between the emotional mind and the logical mind. The emotional mind, which is, acts through feeling, and the logical mind, which wants to think about stuff. And in the middle is either the wise mind or the ego, which really is about sort of saying, I know you're hungry, and we're warming up your dinner, and you will get fed. And it's being able to sort of tolerate frustration is the wise mind, is being able to understand and trust the world enough that you've put out enough good for that good to come back, that logical mind and that emotional mind can come together in the wise mind, or in ego strength, as we call it.
Sure. Now, is that teachable? Is that sort of your nurture rather than your nature? I think of the marshmallow test, the famous marshmallow test where there's two marshmallows in front of the 6-year-old. I've got a 6-year-old. I'm going to possibly do the marshmallow test because I want to see what happens when my daughter has 2 marshmallows or 1 marshmallow now. Is that something that can be taught, and would you take us on a process? We've spoken about POP, but how would you take someone with a clean slate, if you had a bunch of 6-year-olds or even younger, I don't know, when you start teaching these things in terms of being able to use the different parts of your mind to say no to this and be able to wait? How would you put that in a framework?
Well, I think for kids it's very hard. But you will find that some kids are able to wait. Alon's got much smaller kids than I do. So my kids are a bit older, and they still struggle with that at times. But, it's all about getting feedback from the environment that sort of helps you to become much more functional in a world where you have to be able to tolerate frustration. that marshmallow test actually was really interesting because I think they followed those kids up until they were about 30. I think that the results started to shift actually, and it wasn't necessarily that the kids that could wait were more successful, which I think that it proved.
Yes, that's what it showed.
In the very beginning. So I think the most important part of it is just, as you've said, it's about just thinking and understanding that we all have those parts to us. We all do. We all have a logical mind. We all have an emotional mind. And we all have a wise mind. It's just human nature. And when you can start to just understand those concepts, which are quite easy to understand if you watch those videos, you can start to understand, okay, right now I'm acting out from my logical mind. And that person is acting from an emotional space, and that's why we have this friction. And you can just start to kind of understand a little bit more about what's going on instead of getting into the same negative cycles over and over.
Brilliant. Let me go to Alon now, because I think I'm going to get a lot of questions with regards to revenue, sort of what the revenue stream is, and people are very apprehensive when it comes to free, and I'm giving details in there, then it's going to be a charge. What is your view on terms of revenue model, and how can sort of people navigate this without sort of thinking, geez, I'm giving all my details, I'm becoming part of a community, and then what's going to happen is going to be very costly.
Cool. So yeah, thanks for that. I think I just want to add something to what Al said, and I'm obviously not the subject matter expert, but I think like a critical thing is like some of these concepts sound obvious, but they're not obvious if you've never heard them, right? And it goes to the work that you're doing around what we're trying to do is create awareness. Because if you hear, and we're also trying to give practical things. It's like easier said than done, understand that. But if you kind of just know that if your reaction is to react in an emotional way, and all we're telling you is the one thing that you need to do is pause, it's something which you can start to try and implement, right? So we're trying to create awareness around practical steps that people can take and implement them straight away. You're not going to get them right straight away, but if you practice them, they'll become a habit, and that's really the intention. In terms of the revenue model, the intention is to keep this free for the consumer, right? When you sign up, you'll see the sign-up process. It's relatively simple. We ask for an email address. That's your only PII that you provide us with, your only personal information, and create a Gmail address if you're not comfortable with that. Really easy and free to do. Then obviously you create a password, you tell us your age bracket and your gender. And that's all, right? So we don't really have much information on you as a user. You then go through our sign-up process, you choose a nickname to represent you, and you choose an image to represent you. So we're actually not getting much information on you. We are looking at information in aggregate. We're asking you what keywords or what interests you have from a mental health perspective. So we are understanding data, but all of that's aggregated, not on an individual level. And we want to keep that free for the consumer. How are we going to generate revenue? We're not a charity, right? We're a for-profit business.
Yeah, sure.
Our big focus is the employer, right? And we, obviously it's just good. It's the right thing to do as an employer, provide your employees with mental health support. Secondly, it's good business to do so. I think there are a lot of objective studies pre-Panda that show for every $1 invested for mental health, there's a $4 return to the business. But we take that one step further because we're able to provide employers with aggregated insights into their employee base that they can then use to drive real impact. And I'll give you an example, right? We've got a client, and it's a pretty big business, about 1,000 people, and they ran a session on bullying for their employee base, which is important, right? Even if it's impacting a small portion. And in our data, it came up that it's impacting 6% of the employee base. But what was impacting 49% of the employee base was just a lack of awareness around goal setting, which is a super easy thing to implement, but the employer had no idea that that was an issue amongst the employee base. So we're really empowering the employers with these real-time data insights, which can drive productivity, reduce absenteeism, reduce presenteeism, hopefully over time reduce churn, and really just make it a happier workplace, which again is good business. So that's our revenue model. We're focused on the employer.
So if there's an employer listening out there, Alon, they're thinking, geez, this sounds like a good idea for my company, they would then pay you for their 100 or 200 or 300 staff to then join the app.
Exactly.
And then aggregate the data, although the individual is sort of private, that group of people is grouped in a sort of way where the algorithm will work out saying, hang on, you know what, this group of people in this organization are concerned about goals. This one is
100%.
concerned about career sort of progression.
Yeah.
So that's where it's all the analysis around that and then the algorithms that you put in place.
Exactly. And we can, obviously if there's one person in a division or one person in an age group, we won't show that because you can work that out, but we can stratify that data, right? Show it across age groups, across gender, across offices, across functions in a way that can become meaningful and actionable for the employer.
Brilliant. And let's talk about the future of what's going to happen with mental health. I think anxiety and depression doesn't look good. The exponential graph is just increasing significantly. Like Alon said, by 2030, number one disability is depression. Where are we losing it? Are we losing it through education? Are we losing it through broken homes? Are we losing it through lack of parenting? If you had to, pinpoint, obviously your big missions, Panda, is this going to go to school kids? Where do you think we can really make difference to actually stop this exponential curve?
I actually don't know if we can stop it because I think there are so many, there's so much momentum in the world at the moment which makes us anxious. The news has an agenda, news channels have an agenda that keeps us watching. And that agenda, I think, by and large, is to make us anxious. I think social media, which has become, which feeds our dopamine systems all day, every day, has a tendency to make us anxious and make us feel like we're not living our best lives. There's the other thing that goes on, especially around kids, is that with social media, bullying it can extend beyond the school playground in a way that it sort of goes underground, and I think there's just too much momentum to stop the world and want to get off because it's just too hectic.
But give us hope, Allan. I'm a parent. I've got an 18-year-old. I don't know, he's flown through. He uses social media for his business, and it's exciting to see what he's doing, how many people he's reaching. Obviously, that's the positive side, but it's a double-edged sword. There's a negative side to social media. But someone's listening out there. I do know the stats. A person today, in one day, receives as much stimulation, noise stimulation, as someone in the 1400s received in their whole lifetime. That's a crazy stat to understand, just one day of noise and stimulation. But give us hope. Obviously, Panda's hope. It's free. I think that's incredible, with a lot of education and awareness, which is number one. Then low cost, but really, really good services, it seems. Obviously, we've got to check that out and verify that. But I think that's important because cost becomes an issue for many, many people, especially what's happening with the pandemic.
Yeah.
And then you've obviously got providers, professionals within the app that can help people.
Yeah.
So, and I think what happens when I look at the Panda app, it's a safe. You feel somehow, and I'm not a technology person, but you somehow feel there's a sense of safety there. I don't know what it is, and I think that's important. So. I know you can't give us the silver bullet. There is no silver bullet, but give us hope with regards to at least curbing this sort of exponential mental ill health.
Well, you answered a lot of it. I'm definitely not. I'm not a pessimistic person. I'm just saying that the environment is such that I think that it feeds our anxiety. That was all I was saying, really. Although I do feel strongly about it as that came out. But I think that the biggest message is that there is help out there. Really there is help, and it doesn't need to be that expensive. And that's what we really try. Panda is a very ambitious app. We have global intentions. We want to make the features that we have in our app available to everyone eventually, so that they can access a system that is trusted, that they've been there before, or someone they know has been there before, and they haven't lost the anonymity, and they have found the help that they need, and it's been a very safe environment, and that is where they will go. That's what Panda wants to become. The most trusted place for people when they have some kind of stress or burnout or depression or anxiety or whatever it is that's affecting their lives. They can go to Panda in an anonymous way, and they can find what they need as they work their way through the system.
Brilliant. And are there like one-on-one sort of interviews or Zoom calls or consultations anywhere in the world for someone who's listening? I think about 30% of the listeners are in the US, and we're growing significantly there. Can they tap in anywhere from anywhere in the world, and will they have a one-on-one consultation via Zoom?
So I'm going to answer that, and then I'm going to let Alon correct me.
Yeah.
Our next country that we want to enter into is the US. We have plans to enter it in 2023. We found amazing partners there, and we feel like we have a great story that will unfold in the US, which is by far the biggest market for mental health care. In terms of being able to access one-on-one care through the world, the world has not adapted yet to what happened during COVID. What happened during COVID is that a lot of care went virtual. And at the moment, a lot of the regulations are written as such that the doctor and the patient need to be in the same room, and that the doctor needs to be qualified in a certain territory. But that doesn't actually, the world actually doesn't work like that anymore. What happens in the world now is that people consult all over the world to anybody if they are the expert. And people should have the right to access that expert wherever they are. And they shouldn't be bound by the regulations that are really outdated. Having said that, we take our work very seriously, and we are looking at the regulations, and we're trying to understand how we can make one-on-one and all different kinds of other kinds of mental health care available to everyone when they need it, the right care at the right time. You want to add?
Yeah, so I'll add a couple of things. I think just touching on this US point, soon the app, maybe not all the functionality, but will be available in the US, where you can search for Join Panda, 2 words, in the App Store, and you'll be able to access the forest content and assessments, maybe not one-on-one, but that's something we're working on, and that'll be ready soon. I think just to touch on this point on hope, I think like one thing that we can do is just be kinder to each other, right? It's a silly point, but that's within our control. I think often people focus on things that are outside of the control, and I'm not disputing the fact that there are a lot of macro factors which make life very difficult, but focus what's within your control and focus on being kind. And I think also, like, and I'm generalizing, but there's a lot of objective studies that there's no better time in the world to ever be born, right? As in today, on average. And that's still not fair, and it's still not equitable, but on average it's better for everyone. So I think that's another positive thing that we should focus on, and know that it is, there's a really exciting time, a lot of technology advancements, the world's kind of moving forward at a rapid pace with a lot of good things happening, and let's focus on those good things.
Brilliant. I'm going to get a little bit personal, Allan, because I've got you here, and I think you've seen the worst and the best and got a long, sort of history, sort of mental ill health. But if we're talking about, Cal Newport, I don't know if you know Cal, the writer, but he talks about the hyperactive hive mind. He's written a book called The World Without Email. What are your views in terms of, the double-edged sort of technology? Someone's listening out there and saying, listen, whether it's WhatsApp, whether it's, my phone, email, there are no boundaries. It just seems that I can't cope. Has the brain and the mind sort of changed in the last sort of 20, 30 years since technology sort of exponentially grown? I mean, what are the studies? What is happening out there in terms of technology? Because it seems like we don't have a good grip or stratosphere view of what's happening with our minds.
So I'll answer that first, then I'll hand over to Al. I think people often say, I'm being overwhelmed by information, but ultimately that's in your control, right? There are a lot of tools out there. You can pause your mail, you can switch off WhatsApp notifications, do those things, right? Don't spend your day browsing social media, right? You can set limits on your phone to limit your ability if you don't have the kind of discipline yourself. So I think we can sit here and say that I'll be a victim and I'm being overwhelmed, but don't be a victim, right? Use technology in a positive way and set your own boundaries. But I'll then hand over to Al to answer.
Yeah, I think that what smartphones have done for us is they've given us the illusion in a way that we never have to be lonely. We can always reach out on social media, and when you get that ping, something happens to our brain, and there's a tiny bit of dopamine that gets released that makes us feel good. And the problem is that the brain loves dopamine. And so that's why we are forever turning to our phones and looking at them and checking them, because we want to see sort of what's happening in our area. And what it does, it makes everything around the world feel very immediate. So something can happen. Here we are in Joburg. Something can happen in Cape Town, a kidnapping for whatever, but it floods our social media, and it makes us feel almost that we're in danger even though we're 2,000 kilometers away. So I think it's really important to take breaks, as Alon said, from social media. And from your phone. I'm not good at it. I'm trying to get better. I'm trying to teach, Lucy, my wife, and I are trying to teach our kids to be better with their phones and to be more disciplined. So I think it is just about making that decision, going through those many withdrawals that we do feel when we leave our phone downstairs or we've left it somewhere, and we kind of feel that sort of sense of loss. and reading a book or just doing nothing for a while or whatever, gardening and just taking a break. I think is very important.
What about Panda and addiction? Because probably the greatest addiction is not to food. It's probably to sort of digital media and sort of our socio-economic sort of, environment now. Is there something that people can tap in where there's a coach? I mean, I believe in health coaches. I think there's a huge chasm between practitioner and patient, between specialist and patient. It's just huge spaces there where people pay an amount, they don't see the person for 3 months, they've got either medication, chronic medication or supplements, and they don't get to ask questions, they can't actually get into that specialist life. So what about number one, health coaches, and number two, addictions, things to social media? Wouldn't that change significant health in terms of mental health in this country?
So on the app, actually, we have an assessment to see whether you have a problem with social media. So you can go onto the app and you can check that out. To try and answer your question, we allow coaches onto the app. We think that they fill a very important function. Not everyone who has an issue at work needs to see a psychologist or a social worker. It's not necessarily a clinical issue, and they should be given access to all different kinds of coaches. So long as that coach didn't wake up this morning and decide I'm going to be a coach.
Yeah, they've got certifications and they've got registrations and all those things.
Because it's a less regulated industry, and we try and fulfill a role where we protect the users to make sure that anybody they access within the app is somebody that we have vetted before and said, this person is qualified to help you. I don't think I really understand your question around social media.
Well, I think what's happening is, like, if I look at Carl Newport, big people, and I think you've got a lot of influence, Allan, and you've got a lot of networking, is that I just see the mind going in the wrong direction. And unless there's some big players saying, you know what, we are going to enforce these boundaries in place, because the hyperactive hive mind is it's an email here. And I understand you need to take personal accountability just like you do with exercise or food. And I'm not dismissing that at all. But sometimes you need the other side, your leaders, your employers, the people that are placing you in the environment, your school, to make some significant changes, because they are going to help lead the individual as they're growing. Otherwise, what happens is it all becomes in the individual, which is fine. Some people are very self-disciplined, they can do it, but we need some big moves in industry, and I know it's almost an example like Dr. Mark Hyman, who wrote the book The Food Fix, who's gone now to Senate and the US Senate and said, listen guys, you are actually poisoning the American people. We need legislation now to change big food, because this stuff has been shown over the last 20, 30 years to cause damage. It's the same with noise and your smartphone and email. Do you foresee that changing in the future, where like government buildings in France, there's no Wi-Fi allowed in government buildings? Everything is cabled because of the damaging effects of Wi-Fi. Do you see those changes in legislation, or big players like yourself adopting an environment where you can make those changes?
I hope so. I think that in a place like France, I didn't know that. I think that's wonderful. But can you imagine any government being voted in South Africa, where we all have access to data and Wi-Fi, on a platform of saying we're going to regulate your access to social media, or we're going to regulate your access to email? I don't think they're going to get many votes, because I think that people, really enjoy access, and as Alon said, it's a choice, don't be a victim. So people have that attitude of, I'll turn it off when it suits me, the government can't tell me to turn it off. I don't think we can put that genie back in the bottle.
So? It's gone,
I don't think so. But having said that, just a quick story is that our middle child is at boarding school, where he doesn't have access to his phone at the moment for 4 weeks, and during the day, during the normal course of events, he doesn't have access to his phone. He has very limited access. And we thought he would really struggle with that. And I can tell you that he has absolutely thrived in not doing that. He spends most of his afternoons outdoors, playing, swimming, playing football, whatever it is that they do, gymming. And when he has access to his phone, he'll call us. He'll use it in a very different kind of way that he used to, where he would just lie on his bed on a Saturday afternoon for 5 hours and search Instagram.
There's a story of a school, a system, putting rules and regulations in place that have now benefited your child.
But there was such pushback from the parents.
Yeah, but someone did it.
But someone did it.
Stand.
They were brave enough to do it.
People like you that are clinical psychologists with this huge network and huge influence need to stand up and be counted. And that's what you're doing with Panda, which is incredible, because you've got the awareness, you've got the education, you've got the network, you've got the people to help. But that's sort of my cry, because the individual does need help. I think of the Stanford Prison experiment. Yes, in our individual times we can do that, but even in a group, in the wrong environment, the environment plays a huge role. So, in Switzerland, big trucks are not allowed to drive on the weekend. You park on the side, 4 o'clock on a Friday, that's it. So I know it's sort of like very hopeful out there, but I can't see how this is not just pervading every single part of society. And I think it's causing significant issues. I mean, I'll give you, and I don't know what you guys think about this, but with my kids, the number one thing that I want to tell my kids and my patients, having been in practice for over 24 years now, is spend more time outside without a device. Why? Because you move, you get sunlight, you're engaging with nature, and that's a fundamental cry that we are trying to get out there. So maybe, I don't know, is it possible?
Well, part of the app, if you go, you'll find we have a section on balance, and it's all about trying to find balance. And it's about not taking away this thing that does actually, as Alon said, there is, information is incredible. And it allows us to make much more informed choices. And the internet and social media and email allows us to communicate in ways that we've never been able to do before. And there's so much good in all of that. It's just about whether or not we are able to find balance between spending time outside, spending time with our loved ones without looking at our phones every 5 minutes, spending time with our kids without checking our emails, whether we can put that device down for a while and just let it be, and realize it's going to be there when you come back.
Brilliant. Well, I'm backing you, Allan, and I'm backing Panda to try and make that happen.
That's it's what we aim. It's our vision. We aim to really help people to find more balance in their lives and to get more balance with their mental health, and then as a consequence of that, more balance in their lives overall.
Brilliant. Alon, you want to make a comment?
Yeah, I just wanted to add that I think in the US, there's a lot of pressure on big tech, right? There've been a lot of Senate hearings around big tech and the outsized influence that they have on society, right? And we don't need to go into details. I think it's apparent to everyone. I think there's a lot of talk around TikTok being banned in the US, right? That'll be a big one. If that happens, it's going to have ripple effects everywhere. I think the US leads in a lot of ways, and in some ways, a lot of these big tech companies are more powerful than the presidents of the world. So I think we will see changes, and I think it will become part of the system. Maybe it's pressured by regulation. People will find a way around regulation. If they ban in the US, people will fake their location and find a way if it's an addiction, right? But I think there will be steps taken, is my view. I think just another point that I want to make more generally, going back to your point on coaches, right? I think part of the problem with the system, mental health system, is that it's broken. Right, and it's broken because there's just not enough support out there for people. If we look at South Africa, there are less than, 500, maybe less than 400 psychiatrists for the population, right? I think there are about 3,000 psychologists, about probably 40 to 50 psychologists are qualifying every year. There's just not enough professionals out there. So the system has to change, right? And you need to look at new innovative approaches and new forms of therapy, new ways to intervene to help people. I think if we try and say, and this applies to mental health, it applies elsewhere, if the system's broken and we're trying to solve the same problem in the same way, we're going to have the same result, and that result's not working. So everything just needs a fresh outlook.
Brilliant. I'm going to get my toys. We've got almost 7 minutes left, but you're wearing the Whoop, Alon, so I want you to speak about heart rate variability. Is it something that you're going to integrate into the app, or you're not? We're very data-centric when it comes to Mate to Thrive. We're looking at heart rate variability. We're doing functional labs like DHEA cortisol, your DHEA cortisol ratio, looking at oxidative stress, things like T3 to reverse T3 ratio, all your cytokines, interleukin 6, interleukin 10, HSCRP. These are important inflammatory substances. Maybe talk a little bit about the tech, because I'm very excited about the tech because it gives feedback. While you talk about that, I'm just going to get mine. So go for it. Tell me why you wear the Whoop and what's your sort of...
Yes, I got the Whoop probably about 2 years ago now. Peak 2022 COVID, and the reason I got it was because there were all these studies around the Whoop being able to preemptively tell you if you've got COVID, and there's a lot of data around that. And I got COVID earlier this year for the first time, and I saw it in my data. My my respiratory rate spiked much higher, out of my bands like it had never had before, and that was before I tested positive. So that was the main reason why I've got it. I think, not to the extent that I guess but I think all this data is available. If we can harness it and use it and apply it, why shouldn't we, right? We're almost naive if we're in the position to be able to do that, not to harness that data. So, every day I wake up, the first thing that I do before social media is look at my recovery and my sleep, right? And it teaches me so much. I can see the way that if I have alcohol, it spikes my resting heart rate, my HRV plummets. It just is unbelievable. And that's not a lot of alcohol. That's, one glass of wine or one beer can have an impact. So I've become so much more aware of the things that I do and what impact that has directly on my recovery and my body. And it's amazing and it's powerful. So that's why I use the Whip in terms of the app. I think we can use technology. I think the little things, how you type on the app, right? Are you frustrated in the way that you're typing, right? We can harness stats like your heart rate. We're not doing that yet. It's all on our tech roadmap. We've just hired a fantastic CTO, and there's a lot of things we've been speaking about with him. We can use AI to understand, okay, people are speaking about things like self-harm in the app. Can we proactively flag that, right? And get them help and tell them. We do it in a very simple way right now. We ask you a once-a-day question, how are you doing? If you score between 1 and 3, we prompt you with an emergency number. Okay. So there's so many ways that technology can benefit people, and we want to use more and more data to help empower you with that data to help you be more proactive and going back to getting people the right care at the right time.
Okay, so are you recommending things like heart rate variability? A little explanation for the listeners: heart rate variability being the difference between your sympathetic nervous system, which is your stress system, it's your fight, flight and freeze system, and your parasympathetic, which is your rest, digest system. You get a number that's crucially important. We've seen things like mindfulness change those numbers, fasting change those numbers, exercise and movement change those numbers, being outdoors change those numbers. Just working with a lot of execs, they get feedback on the heart rate variability. It's an easy way to coach. Things like this, which is the Apollo, which is developed by Dr. David Rabin. He's a psychiatrist. 13 studies on this in terms of sound, helping anxiety, helping things like depression. So where do you sit currently as it sits in, with regards to these tech things? The Sensate being shown to really help vagus issues and vagal tone. Brain Tap, developed by Dr. Porter, with regards to light that goes into the ear meridians, eyes that are extension of the brains, plus doing binaural beats and going through some type of meditation process. Where are you guys with regards to using tech and wearables?
So I think for us, it will be around incorporating more data sources to help inform, okay, how are you doing and what sort of intervention is recommended. That's the way we're going to use it. I don't think, I think for us, ultimately, we want to be a go-to marketplace and resource for people around mental health. We're not going to do everything ourselves. Sure. It'll be like, okay, well, based on that, stress is clearly an issue. Here is a recommended device which you can purchase, right? So it will be about that spectrum of interventions, and I'm using intervention loosely, that we offer will become more robust the better we understand our users and the better we know what the right care is for you at the right time. And I think there's so much out there for people.
Brilliant, because at the end of the day, it is about empowering the individual, isn't it? They can't go to their doctor the whole time, but they can get feedback on their data, what's happening with their respiratory rate, what's happening with their heart rate, what's happening to their temperature, what's happening to their heart rate variability. And I know that Apple and iHealth is an incredible product with regards to feedback. They're going to have a continuous glucose sort of feature very soon to see what happens with glucose. So, I think it's pretty exciting. Obviously it makes us thrive. We love the tech because we've seen the changes and people can measure it. But then obviously I think we've got to look at maybe partnering with Panda and seeing how we can sort of collaborate together. I think you guys have done an incredible job. I think Panda, the app is going to reach millions. I don't know how many users you've got now, but I think it is the way that people are going to be able to engage, so well done to you. Let's, 1 minute of passing thoughts maybe from you, Alon, and then you from Allan with regards to just, mental health and maybe talk about performance. Maybe we've spoken about mental ill health, and mental disease. Some people, can they engage the app for mental performance? I mean, a lot of these are performance enhancing products. You get your vagal tone much better. You just perform much better. Cognitively, you perform much better. So maybe just some passing thoughts and then we'll wrap up.
Yeah, I think for me, it's about I spoke about it in the beginning, proactive care, right? Your mental health is no different to your physical health. Don't wait for that moment of distress. Invest proactively, Balance is another one. I think balance, people think, means that you don't need to work hard. I think it doesn't mean that in my view. It means that you need an outlet, right? You need to have things in your life when it comes to, work, when it comes to play, when it comes to love, that give you that balance. It still means that you can work hard. So balance and proactive investment in mental health are the two for me.
Brilliant.
Yeah, for me, meeting Alon was pretty life-changing because I'm aware of the huge issues that already exist, and as you and I have spoken about, in a way that can, it feels like there's such a lot of momentum towards a world where we're becoming more addicted to our smartphones and that. And why it was life-changing is because I think that Panda will be the platform that people turn to in time to get their mental health, because so many of the other apps, and Alon said I think there are 20,000 other apps out there that are mental health, try and do exactly what's out there just digitally, and we really are trying to do something that's different and unique, and I think it works. I mean, I really do believe that it works. So I would encourage people to download it and to start their mental health journey, whether it's towards wellness or whether it's to try and repair something that they feel is broken.
Brilliant. Well, I declare favor and blessing over Panda, of you, Alon, and you, Allan. Well done. It's courageous. It's brave. It's a big task. But I'm excited because I get a lot of hope with regards to people, being able to tap into sort of collaborative companies like yourself that incorporated many practitioners and many people within your app to help service people out there. And what they need a smartphone. They just need to be able to download an app. So I think it's important and really just encouraged by you guys. So well done.